So the US has finally shifted its policy to allow Ukraine the use of American-supplied weapons for strikes inside Russian territory. It took just nearly 3 years, and it may only be allowed for the next 2 months as the Trump administration arrives in January. And I just have to say, I'm happy for this change, but the Biden administration and the two sniveling foreign policy advisors in Sullivan and Blinken have been wholly ineffectual in standing up to Russia, and this move is now probably too little too late to redeem the weak foreign policy image with regard to Russia of this administration. But let's take a look at what it actually means. Along with Britain and France allowing the Scalp/Storm Shadow to be fired into Russian territory, by permitting ATACMS and US glide bomb strikes into Russian territory, the US and its allies are effectively endorsing Ukraine's right to defend itself more aggressively. This shift allows Ukraine to target Russian military assets positions just across the border, which had previously operated with impunity, especially air sorties. Here's a map where you can see exactly the ranges of these weapons. Now, the Kharkiv region, due to its proximity to the border, has faced relentless Russian artillery fire as well. Ukraine's ability to counter these attacks with US-supplied weapons not only enhances its defensive capabilities, but also disrupts Russia's logistical and operational momentum in and around Kursk. It will also wreak havoc on any kind of North Korean troop formations that build up behind enemy lines in Russia. For Moscow, this new reality can be pretty troubling, especially if it's allowed over the long term. Russia has long used its border regions as staging grounds for assaults because it rightfully assumes that there's been this Western reluctance to allow Ukrainian counterstrikes beyond its own territory. Now, this change kind of dismantles that assumption, potentially forcing Russia to rethink its military deployments near the border. The West is basically saying Russia can no longer hide behind its borders while attacking Ukraine. Of course, there are risks here, as Putin has repeatedly warned that attacks on Russian soil with Western weapons could trigger a broader conflict, but it won't. This is just more Russian saber rattling to push for Western self-deterrence, which the US has frustratingly obliged up to this point. Again, this should have been allowed years ago because it was never about Ukraine going on the offensive deep into Russian territory, but rather about preempting attacks from military installations that have long been used as a launch pad for aggression against Ukrainian cities. So Russia's threats of escalation, as usual, is more bluster than substance, with the Kremlin aiming at intimidation rather than at signaling true intent. The US decision change also reflects increasing pressure from key NATO allies, particularly those in Eastern Europe who face the immediate threat of Russian expansionism. Countries like Poland and the Baltic states have been vocal in urging stronger measures from the United States, the United Kingdom, France, arguing that half measures only embolden Moscow. Even Western European nations like France and the UK, who were initially cautious, now appear more aligned with a strategy that allows Ukraine the tools it needs to neutralize threats at their source. These changes from the United Kingdom and France and in the Biden administration largely reflect concerns of what the incoming Trump administration may change in early 2025, as well as concerns of the consistent advances Russia has been making in Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. Domestically, U.S. politics are divided here. Some policymakers, including many Republicans, see this as a necessary step to deter Russian aggression and prevent further atrocities in Ukraine. Others worry about provoking a direct conflict with Russia, highlighting fears of a wider war. There are even fewer that bafflingly support Russia for some reason. However, U.S. public opinion has increasingly favored support in Ukraine, especially in the wake of reports detailing Russian war crimes, the humanitarian toll of the conflict, and China and North Korea starting to step up their support. By enabling Ukraine to strike logistical hubs across the border, the U.S. is also targeting the economic lifelines of the Russian military effort. Russia's economy is heavily dependent on its energy exports, and disruptions to its infrastructure, even at the border, could have significant ripple effects. This strategy aims to drain Russia's capacity to sustain a prolonged conflict, hitting both its military supply lines and its broader economic base. While there are concerns about civilian casualties, Ukraine has consistently shown restraint in striking only war-making capacity in Russian territory with their own weapons. The Biden administration has underscored the importance of avoiding escalation, and Ukraine has pledged to use these capabilities in a disciplined manner. Nevertheless, the Kremlin will likely seize on any incident involving Russian civilians as propaganda, seeking to paint itself as the victim rather than the aggressor. This includes when Russia accidentally hits their own residential buildings, as we saw in Belgorod. The next few months will be telling for what Ukraine can do to impact Russian airports, artillery, logistics, and energy infrastructure with these long-range and precise weapons. Even if the U.S. weaponry is just a temporary measure over the next couple months, it seems like France and the United Kingdom allowing for the Scalp and Storm Shadow missiles to be used permanently in this capacity may give Ukraine a little breathing room heading into the winter.